Thank you. If you do wish to ask a question via the telephone, please press *1 on your telephone keypad now and wait for your name to be announced. If you do wish to cancel your request, please press the # key. You can also submit questions via the live meeting Q&A panel.
Okay, if we just take some questions. Yeah, someone's asked, can you clarify what prohibited separate business activities are, please? And yes, we can do that. The code itself contains a chapter with definitions, and when you look at the code online, you'll be able to cross-refer to the definitions, which should make it a lot clearer for you. And we have defined prohibited separate businesses in that chapter. If we just go through them very briefly, a prohibited separate business activity, that's to say one which you would not be able to do through a business which wasn't regulated, would be anything which did the conduct of any matter which could come before a court, tribunal or inquiry, advocacy, instructing counsel in any part of the UK, immigration work, any activities in relation to conveyancing or applications for probate, drawing trust deeds, activities, I should say, which are reserved to solicitors under the Legal Services Act, drafting wills, acting as nominees, trustees or executors, and providing legal advice or drafting legal documents. So that's the prohibited separate business activities. There's also permitted separate business activities, and that's defined as well in the code itself. Jenny, have you got any questions?
We have a question here which says, is it the SRA's intention that conveyancers should be unable to act for lenders as well as borrowers on a purchase? And I think the short answer to that is no. In a standard mortgage transaction, but I think it would generally be the case that on a more complex or private mortgage, there would be likely to be negotiation involved, and so there's more likely to be a conflict. But I think in terms of your standard mortgage, it would generally be acceptable to act for lender and borrower, although it would be a matter for you to decide in each case.
I think I agree with you, Jenny. I think the whole point is that with a standard mortgage, we do believe that there will be no need to negotiate. The terms will already have been agreed. So very much as is the position now, we believe that if that remains the same in an outcomes-focused world, it should be acceptable to act for lender and borrower. And as is the case now, if a conflict were to arise because something needed to be disclosed or some terms needed to be negotiated, you would have to take stock at that point and decide whether or not you could continue to act in the best interests of both clients.
Yeah, so that's a very useful question for us to consider clarifying the position, and also, you know, I think we're going to have quite extensive guidance on this aspect of the rules.
We've had a question saying, what is the thinking about behind relaxing conveyancing conflicts when it is a high-risk area? Would it not be better to tighten the rule? I think the answer to that is that what we are doing is not relaxing or restricting the rule, but we are making the outcome precisely what it says. It's outcomes-focused regulation. So we are now saying that with conveyancing, as with any other type of potential conflict between two clients, you consider the outcome that you must obtain for both clients, which is acting in their best interest. So what we haven't done is singled out conveyancing as a particular area of practice which needs its own outcome. We're saying all areas of practice must be treated in the same way.
And we're no longer making the assumption, which I think we do in the current rule, that there will always be a conflict, although that is, of course, subject to exceptions. And I think there's a feeling that some of those exceptions are no longer relevant or may have become slightly artificial, such as the exception for having different offices acting for either side in the transaction, whereas that may have been an issue in the past where firms were quite remote and there was nowhere realistically that could act for the other client. There's so much scope now for online transactions that it doesn't really stand as an exception anymore.
Okay, are there any questions coming through on the telephones, please?
Thank you. Yes, there are a couple of audio questions. The first one comes from Mr. Michael Speiser. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, my question relates to, again, conflict of interest in conveyancing area. You mentioned earlier that normally the terms of the lending have been agreed, so you don't consider there is a conflict of interest there. But solicitors are increasingly under obligation towards the client and the lender. And just by way of an example, if you learn from a client buyer that he is concerned about his employment and fear of being made redundant, for example, there is and it becomes unclear as to whether there is a duty by the solicitor to inform the other client, the mortgage lender, as to, and you know that if you're going to do that, then you betray the fiduciary information that was given to you. But on the other hand, you have to inform the lender. So wouldn't it be better if there would be a separate legal representation between to buyers and separately legal service to mortgage lenders?
Thank you for that. Of course, when you have two clients, you're always going to need to consider, as we said, the underlying principle, which is, can you act in the best interest of each client? And I think what you're talking about now also brings into play, do I have a duty to disclose information to a particular client? And the conflict that you're describing there is really a conflict between duties to disclose relevant information and duties to a client who has given you that information. And I think you're right. If you have that sort of scenario, you're always going to think, can I do my best for each client? And that may be a scenario where you can't do your best for each client.
And I think added to that, the conflict between your duties, because the duty of confidentiality will override your duty of disclosure. So really you're in an impossible situation because you can't disclose relevant information to your lender client.
Exactly, and this is why wouldn't it better to have it clear cut and for solicitors to act only on behalf of clients or only on behalf of lenders, because these conflict of interest do arise more often than you think. And that put the solicitors in an awkward situation where if we respect the fiduciary information received from the client, nevertheless we are in breach of the obligation towards the lender client. So shouldn't it be easier on everybody to know who they're acting for and have only one loyalty and one interest at heart?
I think when you act for a lender and borrower, the borrower and lender always know that you're acting for the two of them. So I think you're right. I think you've worked out the issues there between the conflicting duties to the two clients. So thank you very much for that. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, your next question comes from Thomas Lewis. Please go ahead, sir.
Oh, excellent. Thanks ever so much. Just to say that was a real crackerjack of a presentation there, so thanks very much for all the helpful feedback. I just wondered whether or not, given the ever-increasing weight of red tape that's facing the profession, are there any plans to roll out more services, such, extending the telephone helpline, just because it's often very difficult to know how to proceed, and that would be really tremendously helpful if you could outline the plans there.
It's certainly the SRA's intention to be more proactive in the way in which it provides information to the the regulated community. So yes, you're still going to have the helpline, but what we are also planning to do is a lot more web-based interaction, a lot of webinars, a lot of online resources. So I think in future you will find us dealing with things in a very different, more proactive way, which hopefully will be of benefit.
And I think having constantly evolving guidance rather than guidance which is attached to the handbook and fixed, we'll be able to respond to issues as they arise.
Oh, excellent. Well, thanks ever so much for that. That's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have any more calls, or are we taking... Oh, more calls.
There are no further questions at this time on the audio. You do have multiple questions via the web.
Yes.
The next email question is, will the new handbook be issued free to all solicitors when it's completed as before? Well, the answer is that the handbook is now going to be online. I think if it were printed in its entirety, it would probably be a very, very, very big document. So we're publishing it online first and foremost, so that you can download the bits that you need as and when, or use it as an online resource.
And we still are considering the possibility of publishing hard copies, but I think we need to do a little bit more research on what the demand's going to be, or, as Tracy said, there's really the possibility of publishing certain parts separately. For example, the accounts rules are obviously very relevant to reporting accountants, and they're not going to be interested probably in the rest of the handbook. So that there is a possibility of having a separate accounts manual and possibly the code being separate, but that's something we're still looking at. But the idea is that it's going to be certainly published online, which will allow lots of flexibility in terms of moving from one part to the other and referring to guidance and definitions.
Okay, thank you. How will the SRA investigate and prosecute breaches of the rules is another of our questions. Well, the whole handbook is going to be dealing with supervision and enforcement, and Jenny's mentioned the new policy statement which was published a couple of weeks ago, called Delivering Outcomes-Focused Regulation. That talks about how we're going to supervise and enforce.
Yeah, there is another question asking about visits and how we're going to monitor. I think that's a linked question, and this all really links into the supervision and enforcement strategy, which is set out in this policy statement. But basically our approach is going to be a lot more risk-based, so we'll be having information fed into our risk assessment centre, who sort of assess those risks basically to decide what action needs to be taken, and that may include a visit, there may be a desk-based investigation. There are going to be a number of regulatory tools which are designed basically to be more flexible and more proportionate. And I think there's certainly going to be more dialogue with firms before any sort of prosecution, for want of a better word, would be carried out.
I think Jamie's right, and I think one of the key changes that you will find from the regulator will be that we are going to be more proactive in dealing with things before they crystallise into real issues.